Jai Hind and welcome back. Today we are going to explore one of the most sophisticated framework from ancient Indian statecraft, Saam, Daam, Dand, Bhed. You must be thinking that why we are repeating this again and again. This time we are going to, before this lecture, we have discussed this as a element of the statecraft, the element of the peace and conflict. But now we are going to see as a escalation mechanism in the strategic world. Saam, Dam, Dand, Bhed, which translate to a graduated system of conflict resolution strategies. This framework rooted in text like the Arthashastra and Dharmashastra, which represents a systematic escalating approach to dealing with disputes, adversaries, and challenges, whether at the level of kingdoms, organizations, or even interpersonal relationship. By the end of this particular session and this particular lecture, you should be able to explain each of the four upayas, that is Sam, Dham, Bhed and Dand. That is basically upayas are strategies and their sequences. Understand You will be able to understand how these strategies escalate from soft to hard power. You will be able to recognize modern applications in diplomacy, governance and management. You will also be able to reflect critically on the ethical dimension of using these methods. So let me begin with a quick question for for the you, making you deep dive into this particular uh, topic. When you face a conflict, personal or professional, what is typically your first response? So ancient Indian political thinkers, especially Kautilya in their Shastra, developed what we call the four upayas, literally meaning four means or four methods. These are Sam. Sam means conciliation through dialogue. Dam, persuasion through incentives or gift. Dand, punishment or coercion. And Bhed, division or strategic exploitation of weaknesses. What makes the framework particularly powerful is that it's not random. It represents a graduated escalating ladder. You begin with the softest, least coercive method and escalate one if the previous step fails. This disciplined approach is highly relevant even today in international relations, corporate negotiations, and conflict resolution. The framework does not advocate jumping straight to force. Instead, it asks, have you tried dialogue? Have you tried incentives? Only then should you consider harder measures. This is both strategic wisdom and ethical restraints. Think of a recent international crisis. Can you identify whether state followed this graduated approach or did they skip steps? Next is Saam, that is conciliation persuasion. Let's start with Saam, which is the first and most preferred strategy. Saam means conciliation, persuasion or resolution through rational dialogue. The idea is straightforward. Try to resolve the dispute by talking it through. This involves negotiation, mediation, compromise, and finding common grounds. It requires patience, diplomatic skills, and the ability to listen as much as to speak. Importantly, choosing Saam does not imply submission or weakness. On the contrary, if it demonstrates confidence and maturity. A strong state or leader knows when to engage diplomatically rather than resorting immediately to threats or force. There are also modern applications of Saam. In the contemporary world, Saam manifests in several ways. One is diplomatic negotiations between nations, peace talks, bilateral summits, multilateral forums like UN. Second, another is mediation in organizational conflict, human resource interventions, grievance redressal mechanisms, community dialogue and peace building. That is a local conflict resolution method. There is local conflict resolution committees in the society. There is interfaith dialogues, family and interpersonal counseling. marriage counseling, mediation in family disputes. These are the also example of resolving the issues through talking. Consider, I can give you example of this thing. Consider India's diplomatic outreach to neighbors through dialogue mechanism like SARC summits or bilateral tasks or bilateral talks. These are classical example of Saam, attempting to resolve issues through sustained conversation and mutual understanding. Next is Daam, that is persuasion through incentives. When dialogue alone does not work, the next step is Daam. Daam means persuasion through gifts, concessions, or material incentives. The logic here is simple. If rational argument is not enough, then addressing the material strength, material interest of the other party might tip the balance. This could involve offering economic benefits, trade concessions, development aids, or other tangible rewards. One of the example of this particular uh, element is the free trade agreements. Dam is still a non-coercive strategy. You are not threatening or punishing, you are sweetening the deal to make cooperation more attractive than opposition. Importantly, Dam preserves the relationship. It does not humiliate or alternate the or alienate the other party. Same and the same way the modern there are also modern application of Dam. Dam in today's some Dam appears to be in various forms, which one example I have just given, the trade agreements. The foreign aid and development assistance is also the example of Dam. Countries offering financial or technical support to secure partnership or cooperation. The example I have given, the free trade agreements, trade agreement, tariff reductions, economic incentives, aligning is to align in, interest. In business houses, the employee incentives and bonuses. These are the organization. This is how organizations using rewards to motivate desired behavior. Strategic partnership alliances offering mutual benefit to secure long-term cooperations. The example of this particular element is the U.S. Marshall Plan of the U.S. Marshall Plan after World War II is a classic example of Dam, massive economic aid to rebuild Europe, which also served to secure political alignment and prevent the spread of communism. Similarly, in the same way, China Belt and Road Initiative used infrastructure investment as a form of Dam to build influence. In corporate settings, performance bonuses, stock options, uh, shares in the organizations, promotions are also all forms of Dam, incentivizing employees to align with organizational goals. The next element is, or next upaya is Dand, that is punishment and coercion. If both Saam and Dam have failed, we move to the third strategy, that is Dand. There is a debate on this thing that what should come first, Dand or Bhed. So if we go in terms of morality, the Dand should come first before the Bhed. Bhed is kind of adharmic and immoral in the nature. If we go by the text we are following, we are seeing, we are discussing in this particular topics. So Dand literally means stick or punishment, and it refers to Dand or Danda, stick or punishment, and it refers to coercive measures, penalties, sanction, threats on the use of force. At this stage, you are no longer trying to persuade, you are compelling the other party to comply by demonstrating strength and willingness to impose cost. Dand can take several forms, showing strength and capability, that may be military exercises, naval patrols, defense builders. Operation Parakram is one of the example of this particular thing post parliament attack. Sanction and penalties and restrictions, that is economic embargoes, trade restrictions, visa bans. The post-nuclear test, what has happened with India, that was economic sanction and economic embargoes on India. Deterrence through credible threat, making clear that continuous defense will defiance will lead to unacceptable concurrence. Used before resorting to final measures. Dand is still a warning. not yet the ultimate step of division or destruction. In the modern application or in the contemporary world, Danda is frequently employed. Economic sanctions and embargoes, UN sanction on North Korea is one of the example, on Iran is one of the example. Military exercise and display of forces, what Quad was doing in Indian Ocean region is also one of the example. Naval drills in contested waters is also one of the example of this particular element. Legal actions and regularity penalties, courts, international courts imposing fines, government enforcing compliances is the example of these things. Under this comes under Danda. Disciplinary measures in organizations are also one of the examples of this thing. Show cause notice, warnings, suspensions, demotions is one of the are the examples of Danda. If we talk in terms of the current organizational or business structure. Economic sanction against Russia following its action in Ukraine are a clear example of Danda. Similarly, military exercises conducted by US and allies in the Indo-Pacific serves as a deterrent signals, that is Quad, a form of Danda. This is a form of Danda meant to prevent aggression without actually resorting to war. Next upaya is, next element is Bhed, that is division and strategic exploitation. Finally, we come to Bhed, the fourth and the final strategy. Bhed means division, dissension, and strategic exploitation of internal weakness. When all else has failed, this approach involves creating or exploiting divisions within the adversary's camp, sowing discord, breaking alliances, or undermining their unity. Bhed is the hardest, most subtle, and often the most controversial of the four strategies. It can involve intelligence operations, psychological warfare, propaganda, or strategic support to factions opposed to your adversary. In the modern application, in the contemporary statecraft and strategy, Bhed manifests in several ways. Intelligence and information operations, covert actions, influence on the destabilizing adversaries, divide and rule strategy, exploiting ethnic, political, or ideological division, even the religious division is one of the example of this thing. Competitive market segmentation, business targeting different customer segments to weaken competitor. This is the example from the current from the business system. Coalition building against common adversary is also one of the example of this thing, when you try to form alliance to isolate and weaken the opponent. The example of the example of Bhed is during the Cold War, when both the US and the Soviet Union employed they employed Bhed extensively. This supporting dis, dissident movements, funding opposition groups, and conducting information campaigns to weaken each other's influences. In modern corporate strategy, companies may poach key employees from competitors, offer exclusive deals to partners to break rival alliances, or launch target campaigns to create customer dissatisfaction with competing brands. Now there are ethical consideration to Bhed also. Bhed is the most ethically problematic of the four strategy. It can involve deception, manipulation, and exploitation. Actions that may be effective but raise serious moral question. The question on the dharma. Kautilya himself acknowledged that Bhed should be last resort. Stake are existential, and others' method have generally been exhausted. Now let's talk about the escalation ladder, a graduated system of escalating the conflict. So let's step back and look at the framework as a whole. The escalator ladder, the genius of Saam, Daam, Bhed, Saam, Daam, Danda, and Bhed is that it provides a disciplined, graduated approach to conflict resolution. The key principles are: begin with the least coercive method, that is Saam. Always try dialogue first. This is the basic argument. Second escalation method is escalate only when the previous step fails. When you have failed in dialogue, fail in communicating, the communication is not leading to a particular result, then you move to the next step. Next step. Don't jump to force prematurely. Next is each level increase pressure and cost. Recognize that escalation has consequences. And fourth is maintain flexibility to de-escalate. It is softer. If a softer method become viable again, return to it. The framework prevents reckless escalation while maintaining strategic effectiveness. It ensures that you don't exhaust your hardest option too early, and it leaves room for negotiation even after coercion has been applied. So what was Kautilya's wisdom? What was Chanakya's thinking about this? So Chanakya emphasized that no single strategy works universally. The ruler or leader must assess each situation carefully, understand the adversary's motivation and vulnerabilities, and choose the appropriate mix of strategies. Often a combination of method is most effective. Dialogue backed by credible deterrence or incentive coupled with the threat of sanctions. Crucially, Kautilya also stressed balancing pragmatism with ethical limits. Even in the pursuit of strategic goals, there are boundaries that should not be crossed. So let's now consider why Saam, Daam, Dand, Bhed remains relevant in the 24th century. So we are talking about the contemporary relevance and its application. In the international relation diplomacy, the framework maps directly onto modern diplomatic practices. State routinely employ dialogue, that is Saam, economic incentives or aid, that is Dam, sanction or military deterrence, that is Dand, and intelligence operation or coalition during building, that is Bhed. Corporate negotiations and management. In the business structure, in business leaders negotiate with partners, offer incentives and align interest, impose penalty for non-compliance, and exploit competitive weaknesses. At the community level, but we're going to talk about conflict resolution. At the community level, mediators use dialogue, resource allocation, enforcement mechanism, and strategic coalition building to manage dispute. Effective leaders understand when to persuade, when to incentivize, when to enforce, and when to strategically divide opposition. The framework, the framework's enduring value lies in the recognition that power has many dimensions, soft, hard, and everything in between, and that wise leaders know how to calibrate their responses. So, what are the ethical consideration when you are employing these four upays: Saam, Dam, Dand, and Bhed? And before we conclude, let's address this ethical dimension of the framework. While Saam, Dam, Dand, Bhed is strategically sophisticated, it must be applied responsibly. Effectiveness alone cannot justify any action. The framework privileges dialogue and incentives. The framework of where we need to avoid over reliance and coercive methods. The framework privileges dialogues and incentives over reliance on Dand and Bhed can lead to cycle of retaliation and long-term instability. Next is openness in dialogues and incentives build trust and legitimacy. That is transparency in the Saam and Dam preferred. Secrecy should be minimized whenever possible. Dand and Bhed requires careful justification. Coercive and divisive strategies must be reserved for situations where security, justice, or survival genuinely demand them. This should not be routine tool of statecraft or management. So, what are the key takeaways? To summarize, let's crystallize the key takeaways from our discussion on Saam, Dam, Dand, and Bhed. The four graduated strategies, these are the four graduated strategies for conflict resolution, conciliation, incentives, coercion, and division. It begin with dialogue and escalate only if necessary. Always try softer method first. The third key takeaway is context determines appropriate strategy. No single approach works in all situations. And fourth is ancient wisdom with modern application, relevant to diplomacy, governance, business, and personal leadership. Then another key takeaways which we have not mentioned and which we have discussed, that is ethical responsibility, that is actually matters. Strategic effectiveness must be balanced with the moral principle. As you go forward, whether you are analyzing international conflict, managing organizational challenges, or navigating personal disputes, this framework offers a structured, disciplined way to think about responses. It reminds us that power is multifaceted and wisdom lies in knowing which tool is to use, and when to stop. And by this, I close this lecture in this unit today. Uh, uh, and I request you to apply these debates, these four upays in your regular life, in your negotiations, in your regular life, and you can get more get involved into more debatable and debates on the ethical boundaries in greater depth. Thank you.